My name's Autumn, and I'm the co-president of AIJ Cincinnati. We are a little more than halfway through Design Week, so thanks for everyone coming out and for participating with us if this isn't your first event. We want to say thank you to Gaslight for hosting us, and then also thank you to two of our big sponsors for Design Week this year, which is Adobe and Interbrand. I also wanted to we can woo for them. Yeah, let's do it. All right. So a couple of events I wanted to tell you about that are happening this week and still have a couple spaces available. The first is tomorrow evening, which is designing for virtual reality, I believe, Tale of Two workshops. So it's going to be a talk, I believe. It's not a workshop, right? Right. So it is a talk, but it's basically talking about how virtual reality and UX are kind of working to influence each other. So it should be super interesting and fun to be a part of. The other thing is our keynote speaker on Friday, who is Alex Center, and Alex is the design director for Coca-Cola. He's most notably worked on launching vitamin water as a brand and has worked pretty closely with 50 Cent, so we should have some good stories and fun stuff to hear from him. That is filling up very quickly, so if you haven't snagged a spot for that, I recommend doing that tonight or first thing tomorrow morning. The other thing I'd like to tell you about is Guts, which we are super excited about. It's on October 22nd, and Guts is a friendly pumpkin carving competition that we are doing in Washington Park. Attendance is free, so you can come. It's family friendly. There will be lots of activities for kids, so kind of bring the whole family out, spend a day on Saturday in Washington Park with us. The goal is for us to raise $8,000 to grant a child's wish for Make-A-Wish. So we'll be doing that a couple of ways, but the biggest one will be with pumpkin carving. So right now we are in need of teams. So if you are interested in carving a pumpkin with a group of friends or with some people at your company, please let us know or check out gutscincinnati.com. Yes. All the stuff's on the card too, so you can check that out as well. And you can sign up there and look at other things that we have going on. And if nothing else, just come out and hang out with us for a couple of hours and enjoy some food trucks and hanging out for a good cause. So with that being said, I'm going to turn it over, not off, to Haley, who is also my co-president, but this evening she is representing Gaslight. Yes. So thanks.
Thanks, Autumn. Thank you guys so much for coming tonight. We're really excited to share a little bit about Agile Design. Gaslight originally started as a software shop, and they realized shortly how important design was to their process. So as they grew their design team, the designers learned how to take the Agile software development process and apply it to our design process. And I think that things that we do here at Gaslight are what the processes that we do through Agile Design is what makes us so successful, and we're excited to just share a little bit about how we do things here. Oh, I didn't do this. I'm sorry. I'm Haley. I'm on the design team, and this is also people from Gaslight as well. So if you guys want to do a brief introduction of yourselves, you can. I'm sorry.
Thanks, Haley. My name is Peter Kananen, and I oversee project delivery at Gaslight. And tonight we're going to talk about, as Haley said, Agile Design. And I'm going to represent more of the Agile side and the software side because I'm actually not a designer. So I'm going to start by questioning what the notion of Agile Design actually means. As a developer, as I mentioned, in the past I may have actually questioned what design meant to the Agile software process. I may even wondered if Agile was actually hostile to design, right? Because one of the core Agile principles is that we can't know all the requirements up front, and the requirements are going to change, therefore we shouldn't spend much time designing, okay? I think that's actually not true, but that's kind of a misconception, and it's kind of the heritage between the fields of design and software development. So to broaden the conversation a little bit, I'm going to back up and actually ask the question, what is software development itself? And there's a hint here, development is actually not construction. This is a kind of a difficult idea to wrap your mind around, but software development actually is not the process of building something in the way that you might typically think. So for example, the code that we write specifies the way that software should work, And when a user makes a request to a web page, if you're talking about web application development, the product is actually constructed at the time the user makes that request. So the code that we write as developers represents an artifact that says how the software should work. So in that way, development is actually a design activity because you're specifying the way that something should work rather than actually creating the product itself. So I say all this just to point out that the line between design activities and development activities is extremely thin, okay? And so much so that, some companies, they have this wall between designers and developers, and there's this strict handoff process. And at Gaslight, what we want to do is we want to find a way to break down that wall, because we recognize that these two activities, they really live together, and when you try to separate them, it actually harms your product overall. The best design work can be ruined if you have bad implementation, bad software development practices. At the same time, like software that functions well but has a really bad user experience kind of ruins the effort. And I think today just the bar for good design has been raised to such a level that sometimes it's really hard to know what's the difference between a software bug and bad design, right? Sometimes users might assume that the software is buggy when it just has a bad design applied to it. And that wall has been broken down in the user's mind, and we need to find a way to break down the wall in the way that we practice our craft. So now that I've kind of given a spin on how design and development relate to one another, let's back it up again to talk about how this works in the Agile context. So I think a really good definition of Agile, if you're not familiar with Agile software development, is Agile is most concerned with doing the wrong thing for the least possible amount of time, okay? We want to find out as soon as possible if something is not right. And this is really kind of the reason that we are okay with requirements that change, and we're okay with finding out new information as we go along the process. If it's not the right requirement, we want to fix that as soon as possible because doing the wrong thing is really costly. So one way that we need a working model for how we choose a requirement that we're building, whether it's design or development work, and how do we actually test that model? Well, I think this image here of a science experiment kind of explains what we really should be thinking about in the process of doing development and design work. We actually have a design hypothesis that we need to test. We need to get users to use it. We need to try to build it, do the development work, and actually have them work with it. So what we want to do is we want to engineer our process so that we're always providing feedback against this design hypothesis, okay? And what this means is we're going to actually experience a lot of failure while we're doing design and development work. We're going to find out that the hypothesis that we had was not right, and that's actually a good thing. We want some of those failures to happen so we find out the right requirement or we find out the right design work that needs to be done. And I'm going to turn it over to the rest of the team now because they actually know what to do when it comes to design practice, and they'll be able to explain a little bit more about how to take this approach and use it in our design practices.
Hey everybody. So our first feedback loop in testing our design hypothesis comes from research. And the way we want to frame the beginning of this research is to simply just define the problem. We want to understand what it is that we're trying to solve here and find out more about it. Just like this poor guy. So we start out by asking really stupid, simple questions. This is why I love research, because you don't have to know anything at all. In fact, your approach to your research is probably going to be better if you know less about your topic. So I love this. And the stupidest, simplest question that you can ask a client or a stakeholder or anything like that is, why are we even building this? And that sounds kind of crazy to say those words to somebody who's going to be like writing the checks, right? And it's not to challenge them and their ideas or anything like that. This is really just to start a conversation about what is it that we're really trying to do? What is the problem that we're trying to solve? Who are your users really? Sometimes from a business perspective, You can talk to a client, and when they think of users, they think of people that they're selling to and not necessarily their end users. So starting these conversations that start off with these dead simple questions can help you to start to identify some of the assumptions that you think you may have known about, or that you thought your client or your stakeholders knew a lot about. And by having these conversations, you can start to kind of reveal certain holes in the thought process that you know that now you need to go and test a little bit further. So once you've found some of the things that you know you want to learn more about, you can start to select your approach as to how you want to conduct your research. And this is maybe a little bit intimidating. I know research is like this huge thing that people generally think of. Key areas that you might want to learn more about. They're just people, users, and their behavior. It's a product and its workflow, an organization and its structure, or your competition. How are they doing things? How is that different from what we're doing? And here at Gaslight, since we build a lot of web technologies, we're focusing mostly on this top right-hand portion, this lovely circle, our users and our products. So once we've kind of identified these certain areas and these certain tactics that we can use, or these certain tests that we can use to learn more about the people or the things we want to know more about, we can start to plan and prepare how we're gonna roll out these tests to the people that we're going to be talking to. This is great. Love that little sports analogy there. So the better you prep, the easier things are going to go. That's, in any discipline, this is always true. Practice makes perfect. And just knowing what it is that you're going to be doing, the activities that you're going to be doing, or the questions that you want to ask ahead of time, makes it a lot easier for you to dive right in that, and you don't have to kind of make it up on the spot. One great thing about just getting everything together, and that's your design materials, if it's images you want to show, or a prototype that you want to put in front of people, defining that process up front makes it easy, because when you actually start to test these things, if you find out that there's kind of a hiccup in your process or your outline, it makes it a lot easier for you to kind of rearrange things and kind of improve your research process on the spot. And that's what I love about Agile too, is that aside from this huge overarching kind of philosophy, you can do that within each of these sections also. It also really helps to define team roles up front. And research is not just something that designers do. I think that's kind of a misconception too. Get your developers involved, get your stakeholders involved, anybody that's willing to help out, involve them in the process. Everybody's capable of talking to people, recording data, and learning things that they didn't know before. So, once you have these things all hashed out, it's time to get to the good stuff. You're going to collect this data, you're going to go through, get all those sweet data points that you're going to use to build your project. And it's very important at this stage, just keep it conversational. These things can be really loose. It doesn't have to be rigid. You don't have to set up a lab. You don't have to hook people up to machinery and test their heart rates and things like that, Just keep it conversational. It's really nice to have somebody who's kind of dedicated to just talking to whoever the subject is, keeping that line of communication flowing and open, asking those really open-ended questions. Try to avoid those yes-no responses, right? Because you're not really learning anything from that. You want to just ask open-ended questions and keep whoever it is talking as much as possible, so that you can come up with some insights that maybe you didn't expect. And if your conversation goes off on a tangent, that's great too. Let it ride, because it's going to arrive somewhere maybe you didn't expect, and you might learn something that you didn't know. Also very important. Record everything. Record as much as possible. And just like you have somebody who's dedicated to talking to somebody and keeping that conversation flowing, have somebody who's dedicated to taking the notes. Have somebody who is just focusing on what the people are saying, how they're acting, how they're feeling, things like that. Those little insights that it's a lot harder to record when you're asking the questions, listening to responses. So dividing up those roles makes it a lot easier to record a lot more data and a lot more honest data. Also, do what you know. You don't have to reinvent the wheel with this. You can just take notes, or if your subjects are cool with it, record some video or some audio, or if you're doing prototypes or anything like that, screen captures are awesome. But as long as you can record as much data as possible, you're doing a great job. Next, we'll move on to taking all of those scattered bits of data, trying to compress all this stuff together, analyzing all this data that's flying around all over the place. And just like the beginning of our process where we're collecting this data, get everybody involved in this. Analyzing data is absolutely a group activity. And having people there who come from different backgrounds, who can see all these data points through different lenses, is going to help you come up with a lot more insights a lot faster. And that's really what you're after here, seeing things from different perspectives, thinking outside the box, and trying to bring things to life for what they really are. So identify the patterns, obviously, that's what we're trying to do here. But it's really important to just pay attention to those most obvious patterns. There are going to be things that are going to stand out right off the bat, and pay attention to those, because the reason we're doing this is to learn a lot about the broadest spectrum of people that we can deliver something awesome to. It's really easy to get caught up with maybe certain outliers, some things that somebody said that you thought was really interesting, and get hung up on that. But what you really, really want to do is stay focused on the common themes that you're seeing with all of your research. Also, record this session too. Never stop recording anything, right? That's what research is all about. I love this. So you can videotape or record those conversations that you're having while you're moving Post-it notes around on a wall, or just conversations that you're having about notes that you're comparing. But it's really nice to be able to reference that too when you go back through your final research document and try to understand, like, oh wait, why did we come to that conclusion? What was it that led us to this point? And having something like that documented is a really, really great asset to have, and make sure that you can share that with everybody who's going to be involved in the project from start to finish. So now that we have everything together, we're going to put all this out there, right? We're going to come to our stakeholders and talk to them about all sorts of stuff. This cracks me up. You notice how happy every single person in this GIF is? Like, I really don't understand. Even the one guy right there is like taking a bow, like, yeah, this is like all me. Love that. All right. So go back, communicate with stakeholders or your boss or your client or whoever that you need to talk to, and just run through it really quickly. And this helps if you're building an entire project or if you're just building a single feature. You want to talk about why it was that you think something needed to happen, how it was that you collected your data, what those great insights were, and what it is that you think is going to be the best course of action. And this is my favorite part. If you're wrong, you've absolutely done something right. This is the greatest thing if you find out that you're wrong, that your initial assumptions, that your hypothesis was wrong off the bat. Because that means you have just saved yourself an enormous amount of time. Number one, you didn't rush into something and spend a lot of time and energy building something that you would have found out would be wrong in the future, and you saved all of the time and energy that you would have had to spend revising all of those things that you found out were going to be wrong. So the best part about this is that if you test and do research on small features or big features or huge projects, You want to find out that you're wrong and learn as much as you can from it now instead of later when you're out of time and money.
All right, so now that we're done with the research phase, we're going to move into the concepting phase. But before I dive into it, before we dive into it, I do want to clarify something, just because concepting is kind of this big nebulous umbrella term that can mean a lot of different things. So for our purposes here at Gaslight, when we say concepting, we mean wireframing and creating user flows. But really at its core, it's all about starting to make some decisions. So we have all this research that we've done up front that Ryan just explained, and we want to be able to start making decisions around that and how it's going to affect our product. So it's just about getting the stuff out of your head and putting it into some sort of format that people can view and digest and give some feedback on. It can be sketches, it can be whiteboarding, it can be low fidelity mock-ups, you can use tools like Balsamiq and Envision. All of that does not matter, really. It's all about just getting it out there and starting to make some intentional decisions around your product. One question you may ask is, how do you even start? What are we concepting? You definitely don't want to take on the whole thing at once. Typically, in our process, at the beginning of a project, we develop a release plan. So we prioritize which features are most important and which ones we want to tackle first. So you grab one of those top priority features and you start creating some user flows or some layout wireframes. This one looks really nice. That's not what mine looks like. Mine usually looks more a little bit like this, more doodly, more sketchy. So again, it really does not matter what it looks like. It's all about just getting it out there and starting to make those decisions. And again, just to reiterate, keep your concepts focused. You don't want to tackle too much at once. If you do, you're gonna run into the issue where not all of your decisions are intentional. You're gonna start making decisions just for the sake of keeping things moving. So you want to make sure you're focusing on I like to call it a logical chunk, which is not it's kind of ambiguous, but just like a logical set of features or one feature. It can be a section of your project, it can be one specific thing. You just want to make sure that it's logical and that it's not too big. Okay, so the stuff is on paper, you've made some decisions. Now what do? We test again, just like we tested our research. So again, just like sketching, it can look a lot of different ways. You can do paper prototypes, you can use tools like usertesting.com, or you can even just have an intentional conversation around your decisions. So you can sit down with your users, show them what your thoughts are, and just get their feedback, get their input. But like I said before, the method is not the important part. The important part is that in this piece is that you're getting that user feedback and excuse me, specifically user feedback. You want to make sure that you're getting feedback from your actual users. That piece is crucial. It's invaluable to get feedback from your users because there's no way to know if you're on the right track unless you're talking to the people you're actually trying to solve for. And something to keep in mind when you're doing this, you are not your user. So just like we're making assumptions, we want to get feedback from people who are not making assumptions. They know what they want. So even if you do fall into your target audience, don't pretend to be your user because you're too close to the project. You know all the insider secrets. You're not going to be able to give that unbiased feedback that you need to make the right decisions and solve the right problem. Something you may ask is, why are we getting feedback this early in the stage? We're just in concepting. Nothing's flushed out. But like Ryan was talking about, we really want to get feedback at every step because it allows us to make small course corrections rather than complete redirects later on in the project, and it's saving us time and money now and also down the road, because if we did go down the wrong path, the wrong rabbit hole, we'd have to spend all that effort to come back out of it. Okay, so now I've tested, and what do I do with that input? I've either been told that my decisions are valid or they are invalid. If they're invalid, you're going to need to go back to the drawing board. We're going to take that user feedback that we got from our testing, we're going to add it to our research bank, and we're going to start refining all of those decisions that we already made so that we can arrive at a better place. And then if we test again and it's invalid again, we just do it again. There's a lot of agains in there. Just keep going. But if your ideas are validated in your testing process, you're going to go hardcore Liz Lemon. You're going to high-five some angels. And you're either going to do one of two things. You're going to either move that feature into the next phase, which could be development, it could be implementation, which Haley will be talking about, or you're going to pull in that next feature and start concepting that. One thing to remember, though, is that if your ideas are validated in this stage, it can and likely will be changed later on as we move into different phases and we gather new information and get new direction as we move along. So just make sure that you're flexible and you're able to pivot as you go along. So you want to make sure that you're listening to your users, and just because you've made a decision and it is valid, you're not sticking to your guns for the sake of having a decision already made. So with that.
That's Katie and Ryan, by the way, also on our design team. Sorry about messing up introductions, guys. So after concepting, we're going to move into implementation and put our ideas into effect. And this is a lot like bringing our ideas to life. So there's kind of 3 different ways that you can start implementation. One would be before development. This would be before any sort of functionality has been built into a page, and this really involves taking static HTML and CSS and building something out of it. And so that's one way that we can start, and that's one thing that then developers would help work on putting functionality into it. Another way to do it is after development has begun. So that's when you do have these features, these really like ugly fields that are on an HTML page, and then you go, oh my gosh, like how do I make this look anything like what the client has approved? So you're plugging the design really into the functionality that's already there. And then the other way, which is honestly the best way to do it if you can, is by pairing. And that's like watching this magical thing happen in front of your eyes when you're like, I know I can do this and you can't do that, but then you can do this, and then everything starts working at the same time. And that one's really great. That process also a lot of times just looks like this. So rarely do we have high fidelity mock-ups when we're going into this process. Like Katie had mentioned, you know, we do a lot of wireframing, we do a lot of sketching, and everything is sort of developed as we go. High fidelity mock-ups do not validate anything at that point. Again, how we're saying how we want to validate these assumptions and test everything along the way. It slows down the process, and by working that far ahead, it actually pushes the line between design and development further apart, and that's something that we're trying to keep really close and in a tight loop. We do not hand off our designs over a wall to a developer. We like to think of it as the best chefs cook in their own kitchens. They might have their own recipes, they might have a really great crew and really great ingredients, but at the end of the day, they're the kind of the masterminds who are making sure that everything's turning out great. And it's nice because you get to control your work and how it gets implemented. And maybe that's like a little bit of the designer in us wanting to have control over what's going to happen to the designs. But it reinforces the fact that we should be working closely with our team the entire time and constantly collaborating. So if you started one of the ways, which is kind of designing first, the next step is wiring it up. So depending on where you are in the project and kind of whose skill sets you're working with, the designer or the developer can be implementing this functionality. We're fortunate that we have a lot of different skill sets within our developers and our designers. We have some designers that are like super JavaScript wizards I aspire to be one day. And then we have developers who are really proficient in the front end side of things. So the functionality gets integrated. And if this is something that goes through design and then development, it typically hits design one more time before it goes through to client approval or testing. So, speaking of testing, we need to validate our hypothesis that we were talking about earlier. And there's a couple different ways that we can do this. We talked a lot about testing, and then at this point in implementation, there's a couple different ways that you can get that really specific feedback. So one is advisory boards. This is a small group of selected representatives. This is someone that can usually explain the problem, tell you what issues need to be solved, or very close to the item. This is typically going to be a client or a product owner on a project. There is some limits here, like we had said before, like a client might say, I really want this to do this thing, but at the end of the day, it's not really for them, it's for their users. Another way is to do focus groups, so getting a group of people together to sort of discuss what they're going through, discuss their problems, get ideas from each other, and sort of feed off of each other to give out input as well. The next is field research and observation, and this is going directly to your users in the state that they're going to be solving this problem or trying to work through the situation, and see how they're tackling the situation and what issues they're running into in their natural state. And then the other final one is user interviews, and these are one-on-one, so you're really focusing on one person and having them walk through all of the stages of things. And the nice thing about doing a one-on-one kind of scenario is that you're not going to get any sort of bias or influence from anyone else that someone else is giving feedback for, like you would in a focus group. And what you do is you take all of these one-on-one interviews and then you start to try to find patterns and overlap of where those issues that you may have not seen before, say, oh, well, I have 70% of my users who are all running into this problem who I thought weren't going to run into it before. So it helps you find those patterns. Throughout this whole process, it's important to remember that you're not supposed to have all the answers. Just like Ryan said, it's better to know nothing because you're going to be asking questions from an unassuming standpoint. And you're likely being paid to find the answers, not because you already have them. And then once you are gathering all this data and getting these answers that you're finding, that's when the feedback is received from the testing, and it's either approved or it goes right back to the beginning of the process. There's a lot of back to the drawing board that can happen in this process, but the idea is that by doing these really short loops of learning this information, you're not doing that at the end and then coming all the way back and doing that again. This is something that we really like to keep tight, especially on the implementation side of things, and this can happen as many times as necessary before a feature is moved into acceptance. So, again, we're doing the wrong thing for as little time as possible, and we prefer to work on one feature at a time because work in progress increases risk. And this is also something we're working on one feature. We like to focus on the smallest piece. Like we start with a wheel, and then we make a unicycle, then we make a bike, then we make a bike with a basket and drop ET in it, and then it flies away. The more features that are work in progress, again, there's more risk. And the biggest reason of this is, say you have a feature and it's what you're working on right then, and there's probably a couple things behind. If you start moving on because a client hasn't approved something or you haven't done testing, you're likely going to make a decision or assumption that you didn't get validated and then start using that to build on the features that you were doing next. And then if something comes back, feedback that says, hey, this thing was wrong, it's likely going to have that waterfall effect where it affects all the other things that you were working on. So you want to try to get each one of those things done as you go. So what do you do after that? You do it again. You move on to the next item or the next feature, and you kind of start all over again. And again, each one of these phases is these tiny loops within the research, the concepting, and the implementation phase. So a couple things to remember. Keep failing. Your assumptions are wrong, you are not your user, and you're not supposed to have all the answers. But because of this, you get to do the wrong thing for the least amount of time. That's going to minimize your risk, minimize time spent on things, and minimize money lost at the end of the day for a project. And then there's this really awesome diagram that Katie made that I'm going to talk about.
So we've talked a lot about the different phases that we go through and how to do those, but I wanted to kind of give an aerial view of how they all fit together. So you'll see here we've got the research, we've got concepting, we've got implementation, but there's this loop where within each of those phases we're doing testing, we're getting feedback, and we're doing refinement. And at any given time you can jump to one of the next phases, or you can go back, or you can jump across phases. Really just the whole point of the Agile process is being flexible, being nimble, and being able to pivot as your user feedback demands. So with that, I'd like to thank you all for coming. We really appreciate it, and if you have any questions, feel free to catch us afterwards. We'll be hanging around, and grab a beverage.
The incredible dribble designers who contributed to the fantastic collection of gifts that we've collected throughout this process.